It's almost lunchtime, folks, and we are almost on time. We're like 3 minutes behind, so we're going to keep it rolling right into our FinTech panel. And hosting this is our guest. She is the Vice President of Executive Engagement at Technology Association of Georgia, also known as TAG. Last week, she oversaw FinTech South, the largest FinTech event in the Southeast. Katie Klein, come on out with your esteemed panel and tell us about the future of money. Katie.
Good morning. I'm excited to kick off our FinTech session about the future of money and transactions. And it's interesting, I was driving over here thinking about just my morning alone. I bought coffee on my Starbucks app. I purchased my parking spot through Park Mobile, and of course I Venmo'd my babysitter to go pick up my kids later today, all in one morning. And really, this is the life that we live in today. It's very mobile, and we're doing all of our transactions online, and that is the new norm. So it's exciting to sit here with an industry group of panelists to talk about what that future is actually going to look like. It's interesting because we as consumers are dictating the pace of what this new innovative technology is going to look like in the FinTech industry. And it's really changing the way that we do business as well as how we manage our personal lives. So I'm excited to hear your perspectives on what new trends and cutting-edge technologies we're going to see that will create these simpler, faster, safer transactions online. It's really going to shape how we do our next models of a generation of marketplaces, personal payments. And so to kick us all off, one thing I think we can all agree on is that the only thing that's changing faster than FinTech are the demands of consumers. They want it now, and they want it to be easy. So, Larry, I'd love to hear your input on, will we see instant payments and a frictionless experience as the new norm in 10 years?
Yeah, thanks, Katie. So, absolutely. I mean, we're already seeing it pretty rapidly in the United States. But for some context, Brightwell has a pretty unique global view of what's happening with payments around the world. So we help folks that work on cruise ships get their money home. And so we're facilitating for about 200,000 people cross-border payments on a monthly basis, people that are just desperately trying to get their money back home to their family members. And so it takes us all around the world. If you just saw Venmo on CSNBC the other day, they said they've got 40 million accounts. And that's one of these driving factors to this fast, frictionless payment systems. But then when you look globally, if you go down to the Philippines, you'll see that many economies where they have been cash-based societies for decades and decades and decades are completely skipping over debit cards, credit cards, and going straight to digital wallets like Gcash and Paytm and their version of Venmo in their respective countries. And when we see things cross borders, there's a huge trend on people really want to remove the mystery as to why it takes 2 to 3 days for my money to get to my country. And so we see trends for, they want it faster, they want it more transparent, they want it there now. And when we see this rise of Venmo-style transactions, and we see this rise of cross-border friction, I think over the next 5 to 10 years, the corresponding banking as we know it today, where it takes 2 to 3 days for money to move from the United States to the Philippines or Indonesia or really anywhere in the world, it's going to be just as frictionless as what we see happening right now with Venmo.
So do you think that, I hear this phrase a lot, cashless society. Are we going to see us, are we actually going to get there in 10 years? Do you think that's going to be the new, phrase that's the norm?
It's interesting. I was just in Norway a few weeks ago, and I walked into a Radisson Blu, a pretty well-known hotel chain, and I check in at the front desk, and there's a sign on the desk that says, "This is a cashless hotel." And so, I think when you look around the world, it's trending that way. You go down to the Philippines, it's a huge cash economy down there, and you start to see these trends of people moving away from it. You know, financial inclusion and being a part of the digital economy is huge in this move from cash to digital. And I think so. I mean, we'll always have cash, right? You always need to tip somebody until we figure out how to do that. And there's always that emergency money that you might need on you. But for the most part, I think we're moving to a rapidly connected world where money is no longer a piece of paper, it's just who you are and the apps that you're using.
You know, I heard a really interesting statistic last week at Fintech South. Chris Palema, who's the president and GM of NCR, of their small business group, said that there has been a 30% increase in digital payments just in the past 3 years. And I think we can all agree that that's only going to rise over the next 10. But with that, you need to verify who you're actually having transactions with. So, you know, Alex, I'd love to hear your perspective from Trust Stamp on, will we see more identity authentication using biometric scanning in the next decade?
Yeah, thanks, Katie. So, you know, I think absolutely as well. You know, to what Larry was talking about, you know, anytime that you have payments, you're going to have identity, right? So they go hand in hand. And especially as more and more transactions are moving to digital channels that are powered by smartphones, smart devices, you're going to need a way to securely and accurately prove identities. For us at Trust Stamp, we are an artificial intelligence company that focuses on biometric authentication. And what we see is that the ability to verify that a person is who they say they are and that they can be trusted is paramount. As we get to and really the reason why we see that, you know, more and more companies, especially globally, are needed to provide a more seamless process for their customers is a lot of the pressure that's coming in globally from, you know, compliance requirements from GDPR, the US Privacy Act. Now there's the California CCPA, which is mini GDPR. What that's doing to a lot of companies is it's requiring them to increase their security standards. So that's creating more friction for their customers, and it's pushing a lot of potentially good customers out, and it's creating friction internally. So for example, I had a recent customer who had mentioned that they had implemented a new security standard for their internal systems, which essentially analyzed all of their accounts. And for all the accounts that had a business address listed on their personal checking, those were flagged as fraudulent. Well, for a bank that provides accounts for self-employed customers, it's a really bad thing. So they saw 10% of all their total accounts basically being marked as fraudulent. We get away from that, and while, you know, our technology can seem complex, it's actually quite simple, right? So we just very simply take a scan of a biometric to prove that that individual is who they say they are, and then we match that biometric up to a government-issued ID to validate the identity. We also work with some innovative companies like Vital4 to grab data, so that way we can perform a number of different KYC and also anti-money laundering procedures.
So are we going to see more collaboration across different enterprises as a result of this, if more companies start adopting this type of identification?
I think so, and really to address that need, Trust Stamp, we've kind of gotten away from just being, you know, strictly facial biometrics, and in a sense we've become kind of biometric agnostic. So we've developed a proprietary hashing technology where we can use any form of biometric as kind of the key to, and their unique identifier to create a 512-byte hash, which hash similar to encryption, except encryption by nature is meant to be decrypted. A hash is one way. So in order to get the same hash, you have to take the same input. And in this hash, we are able to store and transmit that personal information, which is GDPR compliant and non-PII, to within a data lake. So that data lake can be shared within a ecosystem of collaborating organizations. So essentially what that lets these participating organizations do is achieve inter-organizational authentication as well as deduplication, which is an important feature for keeping synthetic and fraudulent actors out of the ecosystem.
Does that then present its own set of challenges, though, with this collaboration across and sharing this type of data? I mean, what do you see as a potential pitfall, I would say, going forward in 10 years, too?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to identity, it's a constant cat and mouse game. As we become more sophisticated, as the fraudsters become more sophisticated, we have to become more sophisticated. And again, that's really what's rising these levels of security procedures. So the potential pitfalls is really, being so sophisticated where we're saying no to a lot of potentially good customers, and that's leaving revenue on the table, but also keeping us from being able to, all of the players within the ecosystem, to providing a more cohesive and, satisfactory customer experience. So those are definitely some of the factors to consider.
Okay, so in 10 years, we're going to see instant payments. We're going to see biometric authentication as new methods. But with that comes a lot more data. And that data needs to be scrubbed and make sure it's accurate, because companies will then access that to make big decisions for their organization, depending on who they do business with, who they hire. So where do you see in 10 years this technology evolving, moving forward as it relates to managing that data, mitigating risk for not only the company, but also the consumer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, in the past, we've seen our competitors, there's a lot of manual processes in the data gathering process. And so what we do at Vital 4, we're the first company to utilize artificial intelligence and machine learning across multiple different industries to gather data for risk mitigation purposes. Artificial intelligence and machine learning is really where it's at today and where it's going in the future. Alex mentioned fraudsters and hackers, and they have had a manual process in the past, but we're seeing them go to more of a artificial intelligence play. So they're programming their ability to hack and get our information that way. So in order to stay ahead of those fraudsters and hackers, we need to have a more sophisticated method of gathering the data and supporting the ID validation and supporting kind of the behind the scenes process of vetting customers and people onboarding in the onboarding process. So I see one day in the future, and in some cases we can do it now, is make predictions based on the data that we have, different data points all over, and make predictions of not only things that could potentially happen from a catastrophic standpoint, but people, and see make predictions about their risk and the risk, and especially when it relates to payments. And yeah, so artificial intelligence and machine learning, and really staying ahead of the curve and being the ones to innovate and stay ahead of that risk that way.
I'm curious, where do you see government playing a role in that? Are we going to see, who owns that data? So are we going to see more regulations come in from government officials on managing that data, or are the consumers in turn actually going to own their own set of data and can then monetize it in their own way moving forward? Is that something we'll see in 10 years?
From our perspective, the data that we're gathering is government published data, so it's really open to anybody to access. So the consumer cannot, own information as it relates to, if someone has been involved in some sort of crime. Let's use anti-money laundering for an example. That data is going to be, published by government entities, and then we'll be able to pull that information and deliver it to banks and payment companies, so that they can make a decision-making process and mitigate the risk that way. As far as PI information, that's another question, and I think that's maybe something Alex or Larry would be better to address. Yeah.
You guys have any thoughts on that? I know, especially, you guys do international work where who owns that data? How are you protecting it? It's associated with a particular person. Does that then belong to them? Does it belong to the government? Thoughts on that? Are we going to see that? We're going to cross that bridge?
Sure. Yeah, so the whole concept of self-sovereignty, right? I validate my identity. I control that identity. There was an interesting book that was written about 5 years ago by David Birch, and it's The Identity as the New Money. And his whole premise was, when, we've had a lot of forms. I think if you look in ancient times, they had a tall stick where they would make marks on it, and that was your form of, how much credit you had. And, then we moved to cash and coin and the credit payments. And, his premise was eventually one day, you'll be able to transact on a daily basis and authenticate yourself to release funds from your digital wallet, which is maybe on the cloud, simply by using your identity, and you control that. And the great thing about that is, like, for example, the social security numbers are really useless. They, as soon as you leave the US shoreline, they have no applicability. Your identity, your biometric, carries with you wherever you go, hopefully, right? If you go, overseas, and then you can use that as your authentication. So if there's a secure way to store that information and have control over it, and then add and update information over time, then there is a potential for self-sovereignty. But then if you're getting into, where the government steps in and kind of mandates this, biometric process, there's a lot of privacy concerns there, and you even get into, our rights as citizens, and I think the Fourth Amendment, so for them to compel that. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it all evolves, but it's definitely rapidly evolving, especially in this coming 10 years.
You all represent high growth, innovative, I don't even want to say startups, because you guys have been around for some time and are doing some really innovative things. You saw an opportunity in the market, you've capitalized on that, and you're growing very successful companies. I'm curious, are there certain projects or partnerships that you all are really excited about that's going to better position your company here in the next 10 years? Larry, I'll let you start.
Yeah, so we, for the last 3 to 4 years, have really specialized on helping global workers on cruise ships get their money back home. And of the 200,000 users we have, we send money on the monthly basis to probably 180 different countries, essentially every country that's not on the OFAC list. And so what we're really excited about is bringing our product to the 44 million migrants that are in the United States right now that aren't on a ship. Because a lot of what we do for the folks that are working on a cruise ship, it's no different than somebody who, I was in a Lyft the other day, and the gentleman who was driving was from El Salvador, and he's still supporting family members back home. So we get really excited about this idea of helping the migrant workforce kind of join the financial inclusion and join the digital economy, and bringing our product to a whole lot more folks that are just on cruise ships.
Alex, how about you?
Yeah, so I will mention, as I did before, the partnership that Stamp has actually just recently begun with Vital 4, and really to address, again, those concerns that a lot of companies, whether you're in financial services or transportation or any enterprise really, is the idea that people are moving more and more to digital channels, and we're interacting with our customers through digital channels, right? And a lot of times we want to know that the customers that we're dealing with, that our company is dealing with, they are who they say they are, right? Because not only are there compliance requirements, but you also want to know that, especially if your customers are interacting with each other, there is a certain integrity that you want to maintain in your platform. So we've recently, to address the concern of security, and to make a process that is seamless and kind of end-to-end from first engaging with this customer, going through the due diligence with that customer, and even to the extent of anti-money laundering compliance requirements, we're working with Vital 4 to provide an end-to-end solution that's easy to integrate, and it uses AI to power the entire process, right? So with AI, you're going to get more good customers approved. You're going to keep the bad ones out, and you're going to retain the ones that you have with a better customer experience.
Yeah, so just to elaborate on that a little bit, what we're doing in the process on the back end is we're providing global data from 240 countries and territories around the world that is maybe looking for someone that could be of risk, whether it to be for pre-employment purposes or for for financial services, for anti-money laundering and know your customer, or even for healthcare, and understanding what your physician, if there's any disciplinary actions. But with that being said, we're looking at data from all over the world, including negative media, and we're in a nanosecond returning that information for an end-to-end solution when it comes to authenticating someone's, not only who they say they are, but if there's some sort of negative criteria related to their account or to their name, so that companies can have a good look into the risk associated with that individual. So.
Great. I just want to say thank you to our panelists and sharing your insight about where we see FinTech going in the next 10 years.
Thank you.
And I think we're the last thing between you guys and lunch. So I will turn it back to our host. Thank you.
Thank you.